Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1984 film, The Muppets Take Manhattan. Now, this is the Muppet film I watched the least growing up. I wasn't really a big fan of this even when I was a kid. And that's saying a lot because it has the Muppet Babies sequence in it, and I loved the Muppet Babies cartoon. I watched that all the time. But the movie that inspired the cartoon, not so much. Uh, I just didn't find this to be that funny. I didn't find it to be that engaging. And overall, I just thought it was just an okay, wholesome enough time waster. But that's really it. And my feelings on it have not changed at all over the years. I know some people think it's underrated. I don't really agree. I think it's very properly rated. And I can understand why critics at the time were underwhelmed by the film, to be perfectly honest. But before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on it, I would like to give a special shout out to Ryan for requesting yet another review. Now, The Muppets Take Manhattan is directed by another first-time director, at least solo director, in Frank Oz. Now, Jim Henson, who directed The Great Muppet Caper, I think originally he had considered directing this as well, but he decided after working so hard on The Dark Crystal and The Great Muppet Caper back-to-back that it wasn't a wise decision, and he was also worn out. And instead, he handpicked Frank Oz. And I think Frank did a fine job directing this, but he didn't do a fantastic job, in my opinion. There were some moments in the film visually that were vivid enough, that had enough pop, that definitely looked like Frank was really showcasing some genuine talent in terms of the way that he used the camera or he framed the Muppets. But there were other shots in this film that looked a little too squeaky clean and definitely looked kind of stodgy at points in terms of the way that the camera was focused or the way that the camera was set up. And it was just a film that, in all honesty, from a directing standpoint, it wasn't quite as dynamic or as energetic as I think it could be and what I normally expect out of a lot of Muppet films. And I think in large part that's probably also due to the fact that the film was actively trying to be less wacky. But it's the Muppets. Like, that's a big part of their personality and the big part of the Muppets' appeal. And just because The Great Muppet Caper didn't do that well and it was a wackier movie, that doesn't mean that this film should just be kind of playing it straight. I don't really think that's really something that works that well with the Muppets. And so what you get is a lot of scenes directing wise where it is trying to match that tone. It's trying to be more serious, and it doesn't really work as well with the Muppets. And there's a reason why the Muppet Baby sequence is one of the more well-regarded and memorable scenes from this film, or the wedding between Kermit and Miss Piggy, because it has that fanciful kind of feel to it. But the multiple scenes that take place in a diner in New York City, yeah, it doesn't really have the same appeal visually or in general. And like I said, it does. It feels a little too squeaky clean, almost as if it's a commercial, like a Muppet commercial for like Coca-Cola or something. Like there actually are quite a few shots in this that you could edit together and create a Coke commercial out of. And I never really felt that way about the direction for the previous Muppet movies, or honestly any of the other Muppet films. It didn't really have the same personality or the same charm visually as the multitude of other Muppet movies had. And it's no offense to Frank Oz, because I saw what he was capable of pretty soon afterwards with films like Little Shop of Horrors. So I think it's more of a case of the kind of film that he was asked to direct, and not necessarily his direction in the end. I think he did an okay job with the assignment he was given, but he didn't really do much more beyond that. And I think part of that is a little lack of experience as a solo director. But I think another part is this is the kind of film that was supposed to be stripped down a little bit. It was supposed to be held back and not as wacky and zany. So it really led to a lot of direction that was in the same vein. And I felt it kind of held Frank Oz back. And you could definitely see that in a fair amount of shots throughout the film. So honestly, it's not bad directing wise, but it's not particularly great either. And it definitely feels like Frank was being, definitely held back in some regard, or he held himself back. I don't know exactly what the reason is, but it's just one of those things where I think maybe another director might have helped a little bit, but I really don't know, because of the way that it's supposed to be a more serious Muppet movie. I don't know if that really would have made that much of a difference. Now, the screenplay is by Frank Oz, Tom Patchett, and Jay Tarsez. And this is another aspect of the film that I think is pretty weak overall. This screenplay really felt like they were running out of ideas. It really felt like, oh, we have an idea about the Muppets on Broadway, and we want to set up a placeholder for Kermit and Miss Piggy getting married and some Muppet babies. And that's really all that we got. And it really shows. It has an okay beginning with the Muppets performing a musical in front of a bunch of college students. And then the Muppets go to Broadway, or they try to take their show to Broadway. They go to New York. And it starts off also with a lot of promise when it comes to this particular aspect of the plot. That's what's kind of frustrating about the script, is that it starts off strong. The Muppets then go to New York, and they run into this Broadway agent who you think is legit, played by Dabney Coleman. This guy named Murray Plotsky. But the guy's a con man, and he's not really a Broadway agent. And he winds up getting arrested. And Dabney Coleman is awesome. He is hilarious, and he's like the perfect antagonist for the Muppets. And you have this great scene with his character Plotsky, and then he's never seen or heard from again, and that is a damn shame. It really is, because Dabney Coleman, to me, in that one scene, played off the Muppets so well that was a huge missed opportunity by the writers and by the film in general. And the lack of antagonists is a big part of why this script isn't really that strong, and this plot isn't that strong, because there's only so much you can do with the whole, oh, will they or won't they be able to do their Broadway show? And the script tries to make up for that by splitting the Muppets up. And in theory, that's intriguing because it puts the Muppets into different situations and has them working in different jobs, and you could have different dynamics with different Muppets. And in theory, it sounds like a good idea, but in execution, it's not really that good. It's something that kind of works, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't work uh, that well because there's not as much thought put into it. And you don't see the Muppets in that many of different sort of scenarios that are that entertaining or that memorable or that funny. Also, the whole reason why they split up feels very forced. It doesn't feel natural at all. That they would just collectively feel like, oh, we're putting too much pressure on Kermit and we're just going to leave him now. And that then just leaves Kermit on his own. And Kermit's a strong character, but he works best when he's playing off other Muppets. And this is very evident when it comes to this film. And then you also have Miss Piggy, who then is going off on her own, but then decides not to, and is just stalking Kermit around. Which I didn't think that worked at all, to be perfectly honest. It wasn't funny, and it just made Miss Piggy into a really unlikable character in this, even more than she usually is, because she's just stalking Kermit around and is jealous and kind of annoying throughout the movie. It almost makes the whole wedding at the end not as wonderful because of the way that she was acting before all of that. And the tone is just off. It's way too serious and it's sad. The whole Time to Say Goodbye song. Like, it's not a bad song. It's a well-written song saying goodbye. But it's so sad. And I don't like feeling that way when I'm watching a Muppet movie. Like, I'm not supposed to feel like I'm about ready to cry my eyes out when I'm watching the Muppets. Like, that's not the right vibe and the right feel. It's okay to have somber songs. Like, yeah, there were some somber songs in the Muppet movie. Gonzo songs, for instance. I'm going to go back there someday. That's a somber song. This is just straight up a tearjerker. And it just sets a really weird vibe for the movie. And then you try to pick things up with the fantasy sequence, with the Muppet babies, together again, or I'm always going to love you. And it turns out to be all right, but not necessarily as iconic as you would think it could be with the idea of Muppet babies. And because there's not really a great song associated with it. I know some people really love the song I'm Always Gonna Love You, but I just thought it was very mediocre. And it even does a poor job with Rizzo the Rat. Like, Rizzo's a really funny character, and it felt like throughout the screenplay, he's nerfed. Like, his comedy is limited because they don't want to be too edgy or something, or they don't want to be so wacky and jokey. So it's trying to be a little serious, and that doesn't work with Rizzo. And he just feels like he's underutilized and underused, even though he has a whole family of rats that he's collaborating with when he's working at the diner. And the whole diner stuff just didn't work at all for me. That's the other thing. I just did not care about Kermit working at the diner, or the whole stuff with the guy, Pete, who owns the diner, and his daughter Jenny, and the whole friendship between her and Kermit. Like, I just felt that was a very generic, very bland, in all honesty. And there was way too much of a focus on it. Once Kermit gets hit by a car, which is a crazy thing to say, but once that happens and he has amnesia and he's acting like he's some normal business frog for an advertising agency, then things get interesting again. Because I'm like, oh, this is different. They're actually trying to do something a little different here. and it's actually clever. Uh, but that's short-lived because Kermit eventually does remember in a cliched way, just gets knocked silly by Miss Piggy, and then he remembers who he is just in time for the premiere of the big Broadway show. Because they do ultimately get somebody to agree to finance the show, and it happens to be the son of this big Broadway producer who shows some faith in the Muppets, and they got to get the big show together within 2 weeks, and then you have the whole stuff with Kermit with his amnesia. And you get the big show, and it's fun. It definitely has a lot of huge, big spectacle to it. And then you have Kermit and Miss Piggy getting married, which was sweet, and it was heartfelt, and it was a nice send-off in a way to the Muppets, if that was intended to be the whole premise or the whole reason why this film was made. But, then you would have these other Muppet movies that would come out afterwards, so kind of makes it less impactful in that regard. But it was still a sweet thing, and it would have been better, though, if Miss Piggy was written in a better way prior to that moment, because it kind of felt like she didn't really earn that big, very, heartfelt, sweet moment at the end with her and Kermit, because of just how she was acting. But after that, then, the movie just basically ends, with the end. And that's The Muppets Take Manhattan. And for a title like this, The Muppets Take Manhattan, you're thinking the Muppets as a whole are going to be taking Manhattan. That doesn't happen. They show up in Manhattan early on in New York. Then they split up, and then it's just Kermit and Rizzo and Jenny and Pete and Miss Piggy, and that's really it. Like, there are some moments with the different Muppets when they're on their own, like when Fozzie's got to be with real bears, or some of the stuff with Scooter working at a movie theater, or some of the other, little moments with the different celebrity cameos, like Miss Piggy working at a department store and working with Joan Rivers as, one of these women that work at a perfume counter and, trying to sell makeup and perfume. And, there's a fun bit with Gregory Hines as a roller skater, and that leads to Miss Piggy going after a purse thief who steals her purse, and she's going after him on rollerblades. And that leads to a fun stunt, a Muppet stunt. And Kermit with his whole plan of doing all these different things and putting all these different disguises to get the word out about the musical. I can have a little bit of fun with that as well, because I'm a big fan of Kermit. So it was a nice showcase of Kermit. But at the end of the day, Kermit still works better when he's playing off other Muppets. And he doesn't get a lot of chances to do that, because he's mostly by himself for a large majority of the story. And like I said, it just doesn't do that much with them being in Manhattan. I thought it was going to be crazier. I thought it was going to be wilder. But no, it's more subdued. And it's because they freaked out about the wackiness of the Great Muppet Caper and that not doing well. And I'm like, well, it didn't do well for reasons that really had nothing to do with it being wacky. It was just the quality of the script and the idea of it being a caper movie. Nobody cared about caper films. They weren't popular. They hadn't been popular in years. So this is supposed to be like a homage to old musicals, from the 30s and 40s. And it does a good job with that, but that's not something that's popular either. So this did okay box office wise, but definitely didn't reach the same heights as the Muppet movie. And, critics were just kind of mixed on it. Even though it did receive a fair amount of positive reviews, but it wasn't one of those things where people were just blown away by it like they were with the Muppet movie. And it just wasn't that funny either. That's the other thing, because it wasn't trying to be as much of a comedy as the first two films were. So what you had was a Muppet movie that's just half of what the Muppet movies are supposed to be. They're supposed to be funny. They're supposed to be wacky. They're supposed to be silly and zany. That's what the Muppets are. And this is trying to be more serious. And that just doesn't work very well. And like I said, they ran out of ideas. But if you're going to have them in Manhattan, have them do all kinds of crazy stuff in different parts of New York City. And have an antagonist. They had one right there. Plotsky. Murray Plotsky, Dabney Coleman's character, would have been a perfect foil for the Muppets. And he was so good in his limited amount of screen time. And instead, they just don't have an antagonist at all. So that definitely affects the pacing and the flow of the plot and the story as well. And by the time it tries to do anything different or interesting, it's already too late. And it's only a brief thing with Kermit and his amnesia. I mean, I give the screenwriters credit for trying to do something different. At the end of the day, they tried to do something different with the Muppets here. They tried to take a different approach, but it wasn't the right one. There's a reason why the other Muppet movies after this went back to the goofy, silly, fun, zany nature of the previous films, because that's what the Muppets are. The Muppets aren't serious. That's not what the Muppets are for. And I know the 2011 movie had some of that too, but it still had some of that signature zaniness. This has moments, like little sparks of that kind of joy, but it's very fleeting. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the quality of like some of the dialogue the Muppets were given, or some of the other characters, or just the sequence itself, and just how it kind of stands on its own. And a lot of that was just kind of the celebrity stuff. The scene with Miss Piggy and Joan Rivers. The bit with Kermit and Miss Piggy and Gregory Hines. Stuff like that. But the whole stuff with the producer's son, the whole stuff with Pete and Jenny, that just fell very flat. And at the end of the day, the script and the film just kind of fell flat. Not all the time, but flat enough that it was just an alright, so-so story. The cast, they're doing their best. I mean, I can't really knock Louis Zorich and Juliana Donald, who played Pete and Jenny, that much, because the writing for those characters is very paper thin. But at the same time, I don't really think either of them had that much charisma or charm or star power. So I think that definitely affected things a little bit. Juliana Donald, to be honest, reminded me of the kind of charisma and charm that Sean Astin's brother gave in the Garbage Pail Kids movie. That's not the best thing to remind somebody of, to say the least. It was fun to see Dr. Crusher, from Star Trek The Next Generation, in one of her first ever film roles as the secretary to Mr. Price early on in the movie. That was fun. But Lonny Price as Ronnie Crawford, another performance that was just lackluster. But the Muppet performers, once again, good. They're held back, and they're not allowed to fully be themselves all the time. But when they are, it's still fun. still provides a smirk on my face. Still, still have that signature, puppet charm and lovable nature to them. And I think Jim Henson once again does some really great work as Kermit and Ralph and the other characters, and so does Frank Oz as Miss Piggy and Fozzie Bear, and Jerry Nelson as his various other characters he played, and Richard Hunt and Dave Goelz as Gonzo, and Steve Whitmire as Rizzo and Gil, and Catherine Mullen does some good work too as Jill the Frog, and the cameos, they were definitely, for the most part, a bright spot. Dabney Coleman just was amazing. He was so good. I wish he was in it way more because he was that good. Elliot Gould was fine as a police officer. Um, this was his second time appearing in a Muppet movie. Gregory Hines was good as a roller skater. I know they had bigger plans. They wanted Eddie Murphy or Patrick Swayze or Charlie Sheen or Emilio Estevez for that role, but they ultimately had to go with Gregory Hines. I know that there were some other actors that were considered to play Ronnie Crawford as well, some bigger names, but they just couldn't get anyone. And I know that when it comes to some of the celebrity cameos, I know that originally Dustin Hoffman was going to play a producer, but he backed out last minute, and that's too bad. I would have loved to have seen Dustin Hoffman have a scene with the Muppets. John Landis as a theatrical producer, boo. Like when his face showed up, I'm like, oh God, get out of here. But yeah, John Landis showed up in this. I'm like, really? What a way to kill the buzz. Kill whatever positive vibes that the scene might have had, having John Landis show up for a cameo. And this was in 1984. This was after the Twilight Zone movie. He had no business having a cameo in a Muppet movie. Liza Minnelli plays herself. Joan Rivers probably has the best cameo as the perfume saleswoman. Brooke Shields has a nice little cameo as well as a diner patron. I think she was originally considered to play Jenny, but then she couldn't do it, but then she agreed to at least do a cameo. I think that probably would have helped a little bit, having Brooke Shields as that character, because at least it would have been a bigger name, and she definitely had more of a screen presence. But I mean, yeah, the cameos are not bad. I would say as a whole, they're kind of on the same level as the cameos or the celebrity performances from The Great Muppet Caper, but still relatively a bright spot when it comes to the film. The cinematography by Robert Painter, it paints a pretty enough picture, and it's decent enough for what it is, but it's not particularly that great. The editing by Evan Lotman, it's also something that's just kind of there, decent enough. The music by Ralph Burns, not really that great to me. Like, once again, like, can we get Paul Williams? It just felt like it was such a missed opportunity by the Muppets to not even bring him back. And especially for what probably at the time was considered to be maybe the finale, like the end of the Muppets movies, like the trilogy. Like, this is supposed to be the concluding and chapter, with Kermit and Piggy getting married. It was this big deal, and you get this just kind of composer and musician. I know the soundtrack gets a lot of accolades. I mean, I got like almost 5 stars from AllMusic, but I don't think it's that great. I mean, I honestly don't really remember any of the songs off the top of my head. So that's definitely something that I felt was also kind of weak when it comes to this movie. and mediocre. And yeah, it's also not that great when it comes to the pacing either, because of how it is. How a large chunk of it takes place in the diner, and those scenes don't work that well. The whole stuff with Kermit and Piggy and that whole thing isn't the best either, and even the whole idea of the Broadway show is just kind of there, and it's just one of those films where it's fun to see the Muppets again, and it definitely has a budget behind it, but it ultimately, it just feels a little hollow. Like, it doesn't have the same magic and the same spirit as the Muppet movie, or as other Muppet movies would have after this one. But anyway, I don't really have anything else to say about the Muppets Take Manhattan, except thanks for watching my review, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.